Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books for the first ever weekend reading report. My last video I did was on how I read for BookTube, so I thought it would make sense to follow up with what I've read for BookTube. And let's just get right into it with book number 1, which is Robert E. Howard's The Road of Azrael. This is a decent book. This is a good book. It's his second collection of Crusader Outremer stories. It's good. It's a good book, even though that cover is pretty awful. I really dislike that cover. It's not very good. But the book is decent, and the best story in here is the eponymously titled The Road of Azrael, which is kind of an unusual story for Howard because he tells that one from the perspective of a Muslim soldier instead of from a Crusader. And it lets Howard look at the Crusaders from a different and unique viewpoint that lets him sort of expand on that whole experience in a way that he doesn't in his other stories. So that was a good one, but I would say if you want to read Crusader Outremer stories by Robert E. Howard, that you're far better off going with Sowers of the Thunder. This is a better book. Road of Azrael isn't bad, just this one is better. I did a full review on Sowers of the Thunder. I'll link that down below. First of all, look at the cover art by Morodo. That's just a great cover. And then the interior of this is filled with artwork by Morodo as well. And this has better stories in it, better Crusader Outremer stories, including Shout of the Vulture, which is one of my favorite stories, Robert E. Howard stories of all time. So I'd say definitely, if you love Robert E. Howard, read this book. It's not bad. But if you want to start off with the Crusader Outremer stories, if you haven't read any of those yet, definitely pick up this one first. So that was book 1. Book 2 is Graham Hancock's America Before, The Key to Earth's Lost Civilization. Graham Hancock, he's a controversial author. He came up with an archaeological theory that there was an advanced pre-civilization that predated the hunter-gatherer period and spanned the globe, and that it was centered in North America. And that this pre-civilization, this advanced pre-civilization existed, 10 to 14,000 years ago, and it was destroyed when the Earth went through the tail of a comet during the Younger Dryas period. I was kind of interested in seeing what Graham Hancock had to say because we live just a stone's throw, literally a stone's throw away from some of the largest mound structures in North America. And we also live very close to one of the best and largest outcroppings of flint that the Native Americans used for tools. And when I was here at my house and was digging up a vegetable garden, I actually unearthed this little guy right here. It's a flint spear point that I took out of my vegetable garden. This is the tip, although the very tip is missing from it, and that's the rear end of it there. And if I've identified it correctly, which is a gigantic if, but if I have identified it correctly, it's a couple thousand years old. So this is a topic that holds an interest for me, and I wanted to see what Graham Hancock had to say about it. And I was surprised. The first half of his book is actually decent. He lays out his theory, and then he backs his theory up. He backs it up with archaeological evidence, with historical evidence, with DNA markers, and with geological evidence, and he makes a compelling case for it. He puts a reasonable case together for backing his theory. Unfortunately, he doesn't have enough material to stretch us out for the full length of the book, and he does wind up just sort of repeating himself over and over for the second half of the book. And more unfortunately, he begins to veer off about halfway through the book into what I would call pseudoscience. And by the end of it, he's discussing priests using sonic hymns in order to create sonic resonances to lift 2-ton stones and mind transference abilities to communicate across continents, and the use of drugs in order to access alternate dimensions and speak with beings from these other dimensions. And I am crapping you negatively. I'm not making this up. He actually is seriously proposing these pseudoscience things. And it really detracts from the book, which is unfortunate because Graham Hancock actually has something important to say, and it detracts from that message. But that was Graham Hancock, America Before. That was book number 2. So book number 3 was Jim Butcher, The Dresden Files, book number 8 in the Dresden Files, Proven Guilty. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoy Jim Butcher and the Dresden Files. Harry Dresden's a wizard. He lives in Chicago. It's in the 1990s was where these stories are set. And he runs a private detective agency using his wizard skills to help people, and he helps out the Chicago Police Department when they have something that borders on the supernatural. And in book 8, Proven Guilty, they've got horror movie conventions that are going on through the city, and the monsters in the movies that they're showing in these conventions are coming to life and killing people in these conventions. And the CPD brings in Dresden to help out, and it leads them into the Never Never, and then it arcs into a storyline that's continued over a number of these novels, which is the Red Court vampires versus the White Council. And it's a great tale. I really like these books. If you're a critical reader, you're gonna take these books apart. They're not high literature, but they are a lot of fun. And Jim Butcher does manage with each book in the series. And I'm up to 8. I think there's 16, but each book gets better than the one before. The characters are developed further. You learn more about their backstories, and it's all rational. It all ties in. It's not. It doesn't take any giant leaps where you're like, oh, where would that come from? And he builds these characters up, and he builds up these stories and these plot lines, and they're really enjoyable. I'd recommend it. If you like occult detective fiction and you like wizards, this is a no-brainer. So that's Jim Butcher, Proven Guilty, number 8 in the Dresden Files. So number 4 was Escape from the Deep by Alex Kershaw. This is a historical book. It's about the USS Tang. It was a submarine in the United States Navy. It's the most famous submarine in the United States Navy, and it operated in the Pacific in World War II. And this is the story of the Tang on its last voyage, its last cruise. It just went on a tear of destruction. I think they sank 17 Japanese ships, and they fired all of their torpedoes except the last 2 torpedoes that they have left. And they're using these 2 torpedoes on a damaged cargo ship. And then once they fired these 2 torpedoes, they're going back to Pearl Harbor for refit and relaxation. Unfortunately, they fire the 2 torpedoes. One of the torpedoes malfunctions. The rudder locks. It takes a circular track, and it comes back around and strikes the Tang and sinks it. And so the Tang sinks itself with its own torpedo. And it goes down to the bottom of the ocean. It's on 184 feet of water, 10 miles off the coast of China. And this is the story of the survivors of the crew trying to escape from the submarine that is simultaneously flooding, on fire, and filling with poisonous gas. Now, the first half of this book is pretty dry. It almost reads like you're reading the official after-action reports of the USS Tang rather than a novel that's designed to bring the story to life. But once Alex Kershaw gets into the submarine when they're trying to escape from it after it suffered this disaster, after it sank itself, it just becomes absolutely horrifying. It was so unnerving of a story. I had to set it down at points, walk away from it, and then come back to it. It was like reading Stephen King at his best, except that you know that this is with real people, which made it even just that much more disquieting. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. If you're into U.S. naval history, you can't go wrong with Escape from the Deep by Alex Kershaw. So that was number 4. Number 5 is The Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. I just did a full video, a full review on this book. I'll link it down in the description below as well, along with Sowers of the Thunder. This is Roger Zelazny's Hugo Award-winning science fiction novel about the Hindu gods on a planet in the far future with human beings who have recreated themselves as the Hindu gods and with using technology. It won a Hugo Award in 1967, Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year. It's Zelazny's most acclaimed work, and it is a brilliant piece of science fiction. It's a great story, but I would recommend go and check out my full review on it if you want all the skinny on Lord of Light. And that's Lord of Light. So that brings us to the last book for this weekend reading report, and that is Stephen King Fairy Tale. So this book is about a boy and his dog. It's that old trope. It's a boy and his dog. He's a teenager. I think he's 17 or 18 in the story. And he inherits a house. I believe it's in Indiana. They're in a small town in Indiana. He inherits a house from an old timer in the town that he's befriended. And he discovers that on the property is a tunnel that leads to a alternate world. And he goes down, and it's him and his dog exploring this alternate world. And it does have some horror elements in it, but it's not really a horror novel. Instead, I would classify it as a fantasy novel. And it's good, but Stephen King is not at his best when he's not writing horror. It's not on the level of, say, like an It or a Pet Sematary or Salem's Lot. And I'm going to put on my flame retardant suit right now because I know I'm about to get torched, but I would say, Stephen King, he doesn't write, when he's not writing horror, he's not at the top of his game. And I would put the Gunslinger series, the Dark Tower series, all 8 of those books into that category. I read that whole series. Again, my flame retardant suit, donning it now, because I know I'm going to get torched. I didn't think the Gunslinger was that good of a novel, that good of a series of novels. It was okay, but it wasn't all that in a bag of chips. He's much better when he's just writing pure horror. So that's that. That's my weekend reading report. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've got different comments, and I know people are gonna take shots at me on King and the Dark Tower, but I stand by that. I don't think it's his best work. But I've got some other books coming up here. I'll get another reading report here going in a little bit. I hope you enjoyed this one, the first one on the channel. And other than that, take care, be safe, and I'll catch you all in the future.